Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. Today we're going to do an in-depth review of the AYN Thor. This is a clamshell handheld. It kind of looks like an old 3DS, but inside it's got a lot going on. It's Android based, it has two OLED displays, and it's got a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 inside of it. And this combination is super exciting. You can play just about anything you can think of on Android, and having two screens really opens up a lot of options too. Of course, you can play your favorite DS and 3DS games, but the multitasking aspect is actually one of my favorite parts of it. Now, I did an impressions video with this a couple weeks ago when I first got it in my hands, but then I went on a trip to Japan, I took it with me and used it the entire time, and so this is kind of an assessment of all that time that I spent with it and whether or not I think it's going to be a good match for you. And to cut to the chase, if you're looking for a two-screen handheld that reminds you of a 3DS but does so much more, then yes, I think you'd be very happy with the AYN Thor. At the same time, I wouldn't necessarily call this the best handheld ever, even though there is a lot of excitement around it. We've got a lot to discuss, so grab a snack and drink. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, I covered a lot of the basics in my impressions video, but in this one I did want to go over the price once again. It starts at $250 for the Lite model. That one comes with the Snapdragon 865 chip. That's the same one we found in the Retroid Pocket 5 last year. And that's a decent CPU. You'll be able to play DS and 3DS no problem, and just about every single PS2 and GameCube game upscaled too. However, when you compare it to the base model, which starts at $300, this is the one that I would recommend if you are going on the low end, because for an additional $50, you're getting about 3 times the performance power with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. And so when it comes to price to performance, unless your budget is absolutely at $250, I would recommend considering the base model just because of that huge bump in performance. Now, both of these models will come with 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage. Now, 8 gigs of RAM will be plenty for just about any emulation situation you can think of, unless you're going to really be pushing it with high-end Switch games and maybe some PS3, but otherwise, I think that 8 gigs would be plenty. At the next tier, we have the Pro model. This one comes with 12 gigabytes of RAM. That will come in handy when it comes to high-end emulation, as well as playing some PC games via Winlator and GameHub and game-native apps. So if you are really trying to push the performance on this device and really see what it can handle, then having 12 gigs will help in that way. But I think the big turning point with the Pro model is that it allows you to pick the other color options besides just black. As we'll talk about in this video, I think that black might be the worst color of them all just because it is so shiny and smudgy. It also comes with 256 gigs of internal storage with this model, which is important when it comes to playing things like GameHub, because as of right now, it requires you to store the games on internal storage. All of these models also come with a microSD card slot, so you can expand the storage, but that's going to be for emulation as opposed to PC gaming. So for me personally, $350 for the Pro is the model that I'm looking at. In fact, this is the one that I ordered myself in the rainbow color. And then finally, at the $430 price point, we have the Max model. This one comes with 16 gigabytes of RAM, which I think right now, as of what we've seen so far on Android, it's a bit of an overkill. There may be some really high-end PC games that will require more than 12 gigabytes of RAM, but as of today, no one's really hit that limit. I think the big draw for the Max model is the 1 terabyte of internal storage. That means that you can save money by not getting a microSD card, and you also have plenty of space for those PC games if you want them too. Anyway, that's a quick recap of the pricing and what we're looking at here with this high-end Android handheld. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to break it up into a bunch of different chunks that are specific to this handheld and what I've experienced over the past couple weeks and things that I think might be important for you as well. And right up front, I think the number one thing for me is that this is basically a perfect size when it comes to a powerful clamshell handheld. It's within spitting distance of devices like the new Nintendo 2DS XL as well as the DSi XL, maybe a little bit thicker, but not by much. Really, it comes down to the fact that this is just about as portable as those other options. And I think the proof is in the pudding because I took it with me on my trip to Japan and I was gone for like 10 days. I had it around with me the whole time and it never felt like a nuisance. It's a little bit hefty, it's about 364 grams, but otherwise I found it to be a perfect travel companion. I mostly thought of it as a thicker and larger version of my phone. This is an iPhone 15 non-max version, so it is a relatively small phone, but you can see that yes, they're kind of in the same general size. So I think that if at any point in your life you carried around a DS or a 3DS, this is going to feel right at home. It's a little bit, more refined and kind of more adult feeling, but otherwise it's very similar. And it is thicker and heavier, but we're also all thicker and heavier than we were back in the day too. So I think it just kind of leveled up with us. Now, in terms of other clamshell options, it's between the Retroid Pocket Flip 2 and the AYN Pocket DS in overall size. It's a little bit wider and taller than the Flip 2S, maybe about a ½ inch on each side, but I don't think that's a huge difference between the two. And I think it's a small price to pay given that this screen is a ½ inch larger than the Flip 2, and obviously we've got that second display as well. So we've got a lot more screen options on the Thor compared to the Retroid option. Now, if screen size is your number one priority, then the AYN Pocket DS is much larger. 7 inches up top, 5 inches down below with a 4:3 aspect ratio, compared to 6 inches up top and then 3.92 inches with a 31:27 aspect ratio on this one. I'm going to do a whole comparison between these two devices at some point, but give me a little bit of time. I got a lot of stuff to review right now, but I do think that these two, even though they are very similar, are kind of in different categories just based on their overall size. There's a solid inch or more in overall width between these two, and it's just kind of a night and day difference between thickness and everything else. The Thor is something that I can pocket and take around with me on travel, whereas the Pocket DS feels mostly like a handheld PC that happens to be an Android-based device. It is massive by comparison. So putting this first category together, I do think that the size on the Thor is just about perfect. It's really nice and pocketable, but still a comfortable handheld to hold. So next, let's talk about how this thing is beautifully built. As I've used it over the past couple weeks, I've been more and more impressed. Like I mentioned before, it kind of feels like a grown-up version of the 3DS. Everything is just nicely engineered, and yeah, it's just beautiful to open and look at. Now, some of these design elements have a bit of a trade-off to them. The first is the fact that we've got this all-glass front here, which makes it look very sleek, but it is also very shiny and smudgy. One of my biggest takeaways during my trip to Japan was that this thing kind of felt like a mirror in many ways. It didn't matter really where I was. As long as there was a light overhead, it would shine and reflect on the device, and it would get pretty annoying. And so it's a bit of a give and take in that this thing is very sleek looking and looks very modern, but is also super reflective. Also, by nature of being all glass and then also an Android-based device, which means you're going to be tapping all over the screen, and then your hands are also going to be touching the edges, this thing gets very, very smudgy. I think the black model would probably be the worst offender among them, and once I get my rainbow model, I'll do more comparisons between the two. It's kind of hard to show in a studio environment, but yes, this thing is smudge city over time. Another design trade-off is that we have this little gap here between the top and bottom screen. This is designed a lot like some of the 3DS models where there's a shelf down below, and that's what makes contact with the display. This gives you more room for the controls where they can stick out a little bit more, so it makes it a little bit more comfortable to use. But yes, you do have that gap. And one thing I noticed while on travel with this handheld is that when I would chuck it into a bag or anything else, it would get little dust particles in between the two cracks here. And so when I opened it up, it would often have just like little pieces of dust that, again, were very apparent on a black model. I found that a constant companion for my AYN Thor is a microfiber cloth. I would use this basically before any gaming session to wipe off smudges as well as any sort of dust that would accumulate when I put it in my sling bag. And so there are some trade-offs here. I love this design, but then it's also, kind of shiny and smudgy as well, which just comes part and parcel with having an all-glass front. Another design choice I love about this handheld are these two OLED displays. They're both high-resolution devices, and they also get very bright, 650 nits up top and 550 down below. It's very easy to see anything in any environment, including outdoors under direct sunlight, which I did often during my trip. As you'll see throughout this video, the colors absolutely pop on them as well, and so yes, I'm very happy with these displays. Now, like with many other AMOLED displays, like on the Steam Deck as well as the Switch OLED, this one does use PWM flickering to reduce the brightness. This is a very common thing, but there are people who do get headaches from this type of technology, so if you are susceptible to that, it is something to keep in mind. The flickering is not going to be noticeable to the naked eye. I had to film this at 240 frames per second here just to get it to show up on camera. And I will note that among the displays that I've used that have this same technology, this one seems to be very mild in terms of the overall flicker compared to something like the PS Vita or an Anbernic RG556. Now, going back to design here, I also think that the controls here are really well built. They're not perfect, but it's impossible to do that with a clamshell. The button placement is excellent. We have our start and select up top, and then we have our Android buttons down below. It's been very handy to be able to access them. The controls themselves are also excellent. I went over it in my impressions video, which I'll leave linked down below. My biggest takeaway when it comes to these controls is that over the past couple weeks, I have found myself favoring certain types of games. And in general, it's been single analog stick centric games. So where I control the character with my left thumb and then use the face buttons. This is naturally where my thumbs are going to rest. And so this feels the most comfortable by far. Using the D-pad does feel a lot less comfortable. Even if you shift your hand down, it feels a little bit awkward. And so even though, yes, you can play D-pad style games on this, it hasn't been that great of an experience compared to using an analog stick. And it is to the point where I have found myself avoiding D-pad games in favor of using the analog stick. And I think that anytime you change the way that you're playing games, that's kind of a bad sign. Along those same lines, using dual analog stick games, like more modern stuff, first-person shooters, this is also a bit of a chore. The analog sticks themselves are great. They're Hall sensor, they're a little bit grippy, and they have a wide range of motion to them, but they also, just by virtue of being in a clamshell, are kind of flush with the rest of the device. And this means that as you're using them, it kind of feels a little bit more flicky than a full-size gaming experience. And so often I have found, again, that if I am going to be playing a game like, a first-person shooter game, that I generally just don't enjoy this as much as using something with full-size controls. My last control nitpick are these triggers. These things are a little bit sharp along the edge, and I can definitely feel that edge as I'm using it. Not the worst thing in the world, but something that has just slightly annoyed me over the past couple weeks. So in the end, I think that the best way I can describe it is that these controls are relatively cramped. Because we've got the screen in the middle, we just don't have a lot of space for the controls to be put in a more comfortable place. If we look at something like the Retroid Pocket Flip 2, they didn't have to deal with that second screen down below, and so they pushed the face buttons as well as the D-pad inboard. And to me, this is a much more comfortable experience, but unfortunately, we don't have that luxury with the Thor. And again, I think it's just a natural trade-off of the design that we have to work with here, which overall I think is still very good, but the reality of it is that it's not a perfect experience for every single type of game. There are other things you can do to improve the overall ergonomics. For example, AYN sells this grip right here, and it works pretty well. I showed this off in my impressions video. It does make it feel more comfortable and roomy, but at the expense of making it quite a bit thicker and more bulbous. And so personally, I have not been using this grip at all just because it makes it so much less portable. So the way I think about it, if you're going to be home and you're going to be playing, then maybe this would be a good fit, just in the sense that, you don't really have to worry about transporting it around. And so therefore, you can make it feel a lot more comfortable, but then when you take it with you on the go, maybe you can remove that grip and then have something that's a lot more portable. And then finally, the last thing in this whole design section is a quick update on the hinge, and over the past couple weeks, it's been excellent. No issues so far, no cracking or creaking or anything else like that. It's a little bit on the loose side, but that is actually a good thing. It means it's not going to have additional pressure on the hinge. And so in general, it does feel like it's something that's going to endure over time, but obviously time will tell. Like with every other clamshell, there are probably going to be people who have issues with the hinge. After all, it is a moving part in a handheld, but overall, I've had no problems myself. It opens up to 3 different levels, and all 3 have been good for me. There's like the laptop mode, and then the middle one, which is the standard one that I use, but you can also open it up all the way. All 3 have been good in different use cases. So wrapping up this section, I think that overall this is a beautifully built handheld. It's got some compromises inherent with the clamshell form factor, but there's a lot of good here as well. So next, let's talk about the software, and I've been really impressed with it. It's very simple, but it just works. It's an Android-based handheld, and it's one of the first dual-screen ones, so I was expecting a lot of bugs, but honestly, it's been a very seamless experience. Yes, it's going to be like any other Android handheld, where you're going to install your apps and emulators and everything else, but the beauty comes in the simplicity of the AYN software that they have here. And it looks very bare bones, but that's kind of the beauty of it. We can change out, whether or not one certain screen is going to show over the other. We can adjust the brightness for both screens at once or one screen at a time. And then also we can adjust the volume for each. We've got a mixer here, which I think is awesome. In my impressions video, I found a couple different bugs. For example, when I put the device to sleep, the bottom screen would always come back to 100% brightness. That has now been fixed in a software update. In addition, I found that there was a mismatch in the brightness between the two, and that if you tried to adjust them both at once, you would have to go in and tweak the other one as well. That has also been tuned too, so now this works really well. Beyond that, we can go into the task manager here to close out any open apps, and then also we have a settings menu. This will give you quick access to a lot of things that are very handy. In addition to being able to monitor stats, you can do things like change out, the performance mode or the fan mode. And then also they have this focus mode option too. If you have it set to auto lock, that means that if you're using the top screen, you can tap on it. It'll make the controls work with the top screen and bottom screen and vice versa. Or you can lock it to the top and bottom screen. This is really handy if you're playing a game up top and then using a guide down below where you can scroll between the guide on the bottom, but it's not going to lose focus of the controls up top. So personally, I've been using the top screen option here because the majority of the time I'm playing games up top. You can make some other changes like your controller profile or turning off the vibration, and then also you can adjust your LED lights for your joystick. So a lot of really quick, handy options for this device. You can also swipe down from the top and access most of the same menu options as well. This is the same as it's been on other AYN devices. You can also swap between 60 frames per second up top or 120 up top. The bottom screen is always going to be 60 frames per second. In 120 Hz mode, that means that the top display will show at 120 frames per second. The bottom will say 60, but it is a bit of a hack to get it working. And as a result, if you try to play fast-paced games on the bottom screen while the top screen is running 120 frames per second, you are going to see some screen tearing and a little bit of wobbling, especially with side-scrolling games. Now, in practical terms, even though I can make the screen tearing happen, I'm not sure if I would ever be in a situation where that would happen, because if I'm going to be playing a game on the bottom, then I don't need 120 frames up top. I'll usually be watching like a movie, which doesn't need 120 frames per second. So in that regard, I see this as an issue at a software level, but at a practical level, I'm not really seeing it. If anything, I'm just very happy that we have the ability to have 120 frames up top and 60 down below, because that does open up a world of possibilities when it comes to playing high-end content up top. One other thing worth noting in the software is that video out works great. It's going to mimic the top display and everything is very seamless. You can turn off the displays on the device in the settings if you want as well. The only update that I would love to see in the software is that it would remain on when you close the lid. As it stands right now, it just goes to sleep no matter what you choose in the settings. Okay, now that we've talked about the size and the design and the software, now let's talk about the fact that, two screens in many ways is going to be better than one. But it's also worth noting that many times when I was playing the Thor, I just didn't need two screens at all. We'll talk about that too. So right off the bat, playing dual screen games, 3DS and DS, are going to be awesome on this handheld. There is nothing really like having two screens showing at once vertically. Not only that, the Thor's got so much power that you can upscale these games to max out the resolution, so a 4x upscale is no problem on this device. I'm using the latest version of Azahar, which now has dual screen support, and it works great with the Thor and their software. And so yes, overall things have been working really well on this handheld. It's not a perfect 3DS experience, we'll talk about that more later, but as it stands, yes, if you're looking to play 3DS games, this thing is beautiful, especially on these dual OLED displays. The same goes with Nintendo DS, which looks amazing compared to original hardware. For this setup, I'm using a fork of Melon DS, which has dual screen support, and it's been working pretty well. Depending on your preference, you could make it so both screens are the exact same size. What I've been doing is making them both 4x3 and then making them as large as possible. Because the top screen is larger, that means the 4x3 DS screen above is also going to be larger, but personally, I prefer this over having a smaller screen real estate. And between these two catalogs, you've got thousands and thousands of games to choose from. The DS alone had nearly 4,000 titles between cartridges and DSiWare games, and then there were about 1,800 3DS games too. And again, because we've got these OLED panels, these games just really pop. They are beautiful. Even playing vertically oriented games like Sonic Rush, where you see both screens at once, having a larger screen up top doesn't really make it that much offset, and so this has been perfectly playable for me as well. Again, you could always shrink down the display up top to make them perfectly synced, but I kind of like this mismatch here, and again, I love having it as big as possible. So in regards of two screens being better than one, absolutely, when it comes to 3DS and DS games, this is a treat to play on the Thor. Having two screens also opens up a world of multitasking. For example, you could watch a movie up top, like right now I'm watching episode 3 of Afro Samurai, but then also play a game down below. The 31:27 aspect ratio of this bottom screen is a perfect match to the Retroid Pocket Classic and the Retroid Pocket Mini version 2, and it works especially well with certain systems like Game Boy and Game Boy Color. So I do like this setup of playing a simple game down below and then maybe re-watching an old classic up above, where it doesn't really need your full attention for either. And you can obviously do vice versa, so up above here I'm playing a widescreen game on the PSP, but then down below I'm playing a 4x3 TV show, Gummy Bears, and so I'm able to basically do both at once. I wouldn't really recommend doing two things that require your full attention at the same time, but if you're just kind of passing the time and want to be a little bit distracted, this is an easy way to do that. Another great example would be to play a game up top and then maybe have some music streaming down below, and again, because we have that audio mixer, you can tune this perfectly so that the music from the game as well as from the music you're listening to maybe complement each other, or you just want to hear one over the other. By the way, the audio quality on this device is good. I did some testing in my impressions video, which is linked down below if you want to hear a sample, but yes, in general, I think that the audio here is decent. And then of course you could always just do two different things at once, for example, playing an RPG, but then consulting a guide down below. And so that's one of the beauties of having a two-screen setup, is that you can multitask and it gives you just a lot more options. Now there are some times when having a two-screen setup like this makes it a little bit worse than other options on the market. So let's talk a little bit about this and why it may at some times be a worse experience. The first point we've already talked about, and that is that we have cramped controls. Because we've got this screen down below, that means we have less space to put the controls, and as a result, yeah, it's a little bit cramped feeling overall. Again, not a deal breaker to me, but something to be aware of if you are looking to make this like your end-all be-all handheld. A single screen handheld like this one obviously is not going to have two screens, so you're not going to have all that additional functionality, but it is a lot more comfortable to use just because we've got a lot more space for our overall controls. Another thing we have to contend with a two-screen device are the overall physics of having a powerful chipset inside of it, and even with active cooling here on the back, it still gets quite warm. And this is just the natural result of having this much space to work with. There is not a lot of space for the heat to dissipate. Most of the heat is going to be concentrated on one side of the device, which is where the chipset is underneath. It actually gets the hottest on the front in the top right of the display. Now your thumbs often will not be touching this part of the machine, and so it's not really something that you feel, but yes, you can see it gets quite hot. Here I'm playing Breath of the Wild on the Wii U, and I'm running it in the high performance mode and the fan at max, and even then it's getting about 47 degrees Celsius. And for most people, anything above about 34 degrees or so is going to be warm to the touch, so yes, this is going to be quite warm. On the back of the device, it's also going to get quite warm around that same area, and again, this has to do with the fact that it's close to the CPU. The fan is on this side, which means it is going to be a little bit cooler, but not by much, about 45 degrees Celsius, so still warm to the touch. Now for me personally, I hate heat transfer in a handheld, so I'm very sensitive to it, and it's not to the point where I would consider it to be hot or uncomfortable, but it is a little bit warm, so something I wanted to bring up. And the way I've been using it is just putting it to smart mode no matter what performance profile I'm using. That means the fan is always going to be on, but it'll kick in even more when I need it. And in general, the fan is very quiet. It's very hard for me to even pick up with a microphone. It only can really be audible to my ears when I use the sport mode, and even then it's still very quiet. So in general, I would say use the fan more than not. And then finally, the other negative with having a two-screen setup is that it is going to drain the battery a little bit faster when using both screens at once compared to just one. So let's talk about battery life and the full suite of testing that I did. Number one, I tested everything at 50% brightness and volume as always. I also got a 3% drain overnight. That means that when I put it into sleep and came back 12 hours later, it had lost 3% of battery. That is pretty good. Now in all these tests, I did it with both screens on, but I also tested it with a single screen in one of the examples. Let's start in the far right with Final Fantasy VI Advance. So this here would be a best case scenario. I ran it at 120 Hz with the LCD 3X shader in RetroArch. On the bottom screen, I also had an FAQ running just, to kind of mimic that idea of playing a role-playing game while also consulting a guide. And the battery life in this case was pretty much amazing. It was 16 hours and 40 minutes. Like, I cannot expect any more from something like Wait. So when it comes to playing retro games and even streaming games, I would expect at least 12 hours of battery on this machine. Now my next example is with PlayStation 2, and this is where I used both two screens and one. To start, let's talk about the two-screen setup. So I did 120Hz up top, 2.5x resolution, running Nether SX2 Classic, and then I had a game FAQ down below. Now, Dragon Quest VIII is not the most demanding game on the PS2, but it is kind of middle of the road. Now, the great thing about this is that I kept it in the standard performance mode and it still played at full speed. That's because the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is a very powerful processor. This gave me a little bit under 7 hours of gameplay time with both screens running. Now, I also did a similar test, but this time I turned off that bottom display. So again, I was just playing Dragon Quest VIII at those same settings, but with only the game running. And this did give me a little bit more battery life, about 40 minutes altogether. So yes, if you want to save battery, then having one screen on will give you that. But honestly, between the two, I think that's pretty negligible difference given the fact that we're getting about 7 hours for both. Next up, we have New Super Mario Bros. 2 on the 3DS. So I played this at 120Hz mode, 4x resolution, in the latest version of Azahar, and again, with those dual screens running. And for this one, I got a very similar result, a little bit under 7 hours of battery life. When playing upscaled DS games, I would expect even better battery, probably somewhere around 8 or 9 hours based on my testing. So next up, I did some PC testing using GameHub Lite at 720p, 120Hz mode here, and using the performance metrics in the screen down below. And in order to have a smooth experience, I turned it on the high performance mode and the smart fan. This gave me a little bit over 4 hours of battery life. If you try to push it with more demanding PC games, I would expect to get less battery, but as it stands right now, I think again this is very decent. And for my last test, I did Breath of the Wild on the Wii U using 120Hz mode again with the CMU fork that allows for dual screen gameplay. Now this game doesn't actually do dual screens, it just shows like a little icon that says tap on the screen if you want to play down below, but I did want to at least have 2 screens running at once. And this is a hard game to run on Android. It was getting an average about 25 to 30 frames per second in 720p, and I got a little bit over 3 hours of battery life. There are probably going to be ways that you could tax the battery even further by doing like high performance benchmarks or, running a really hard game in Windlater or something similar, but as it stands right now, this is kind of the spectrum of what you can expect in terms of battery life. And in all these cases, yes, using 2 screens will probably sap a little bit more battery, but it wasn't as much as I was expecting. Now, even though we've seen the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and its equivalent in many other handhelds over the past couple of years, it is still worth reiterating that it kicks butt. Let's do a quick emulation showcase just to show you all the stuff that you can play on the AYN Thor. If you're just now starting out and you've never seen any of these handhelds before, they can be quite magical just based on everything that they can play. All the easy stuff like Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, I think this is all a given, that they're going to play wonderfully, and they look really good on this large 6-inch display. All your classic home systems like Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis, these are all going to play great too. And, even though these are 4x3 systems, which means they're going to have black bars on the left and right, which is called pillar boxing, I think it still looks really good on a clamshell, especially with an OLED panel, because the bezels just kind of fade into black. And so even though there are much cheaper handhelds that will play these systems very well too, it is worth showing that the AYN Thor is going to knock them out of the park. When you get to the higher end systems, this is where things get very interesting because you can do a number of different options. For example, you can upscale them to 1080p, or you can also throw on a CRT shader, or maybe just do both. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 can handle all of this stuff no problem. So you want to play Mario 64 upscaled to 1080p, but then also throw on a heavy-duty shader like CRT Geom Deluxe, yeah, it's going to do it with absolutely no problem. And many of these systems will also support widescreen hacks like on Dreamcast, so Sonic Adventure 2 here, 1080p upscale, and widescreen. Even the harder to emulate systems like Sega Saturn using the Beetle Saturn core, it is just going to run absolutely fine. PlayStation Portable games also look wonderful on this display because they're a native 16:9 aspect ratio. So again, upscale these to 1080p. You've got a 6-inch OLED panel to play these games. I think it looks wonderful. GameCube's going to run no problem as well, and all these games up through PS2 are running in the standard performance mode. So we're not even unlocking the CPU power right now. Regardless, we can play these games at a 3x resolution, and again, many of these also have widescreen support. Same thing with running Wii games on the Dolphin emulator with the 3x resolution upscale. Most of these games were natively 16:9, so they're going to fill up that top screen. It's also a very similar story with PlayStation 2 using the Nether SX2 emulator. Now this one has not had a lot of significant emulation development over the past couple of years, so there are going to be some games that struggle with it, but the vast majority of PS2 games are going to run great. You can upscale these also to a 1080p resolution, and many of these have widescreen hacks and cheats as well. And so if you're looking for an upscaled PS2 clamshell OLED experience, this is it right here. And we're not even talking about that second display, which you can use for anything, like a guide or to stream some movies or something else down below. You can do all of that as well. Now, one system that does have dual screen support, at least intermittently, is the Wii U. Now, that being said, there are many Wii U games that do not have true dual screen support. Many of them will just show the exact same screen on the bottom. And given that the gamepad on the original Wii U was a 16:9 aspect ratio, it's going to look especially tiny on that bottom display. So for many games, it's not worth using this dual screen function. A good example is going to be Breath of the Wild. This one literally does not do anything other than tell you that you can tap on it and then play on the gamepad if you would like. So this is a game that really doesn't have any added benefit of using that second display. Now, there are quite a few that do take advantage of that second screen more or less. Most of the time it's going to be an inventory menu or maybe a map, and sometimes that can be really helpful, but in other times it might be just as easy to use the second screen for something else and then just press the start button to go into your regular menu and then change things that way. So it's really going to depend on the type of Wii U game that you are playing and whether or not that second display is going to be a benefit for you. Now, that being said, Wii U development on Android is still very early stages, so there are many games that will crash or have bugs, and so I would definitely not recommend buying the AYN Thor specifically for Wii U emulation, at least not right now. There may come a time where this will be totally worth it, but as it stands today, it's more like just a nice to have. Another challenging system to emulate is Nintendo Switch. For this testing, I used the AYN emulator, which I think right now is probably the best in the business. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 has really nice compatibility with Switch emulation on Android. You're able to load custom turnip drivers, and AYN will walk you through that whole process. It's a really handy setup. And the majority of Switch titles are going to work great and will play at full speed even if you use them in docked mode, which means that they will likely be a 1080p resolution, which is going to look amazing on this OLED panel. Now, I wouldn't call this a Switch replacement. There are going to be plenty of games that don't run correctly, but it is pretty surprising how many games run well right now. And this is the same performance that we've seen on the Odin 2 line of devices that have the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 inside of them. So no surprises here, but I just wanted to reiterate that yes, emulation on this device is really good. Now, one platform I've been really enjoying over the past couple months has been PC gaming on Android. There's a bunch of different tools, Winlator, Game Native, and Game Hub, and now even Game Hub Lite. Many of these apps will allow you to access your Steam games, including your cloud saves, and then play these PC games natively on Android, and it's been a really wonderful experience. There are still a couple hiccups here and there, including frame pacing issues, but in general, this has been an excellent way to play my indie games. To give you an idea, I used to play a lot of these games via Switch emulation, but now with these Steam cloud saves, it's just been a lot more convenient to play them via something like Game Hub. And so I think this is an additional added benefit of having a high-powered Android device, is that we're able to play lightweight PC games, and you can even play some stuff that's pretty heavyweight too, up to about the Xbox 360 era. I made a whole video talking about playing PC games on Android. I will leave it linked down below if you have no idea what I'm talking about, but definitely worth exploring on the AYN Thor. It is worth noting that this is the hottest that I could get the device. I saw the temperatures on the CPU getting around 82 degrees internally, but again, about 47 degrees externally. So just something to bear in mind is that it does warm up your device quite a bit. And then finally, if you want to play some high-resolution gaming without taxing your system, then game streaming is the way to go. You've got many different options here. You could do Xbox Cloud streaming, but for this example, I used NVIDIA GeForce Now. I have a paid tier, which means that I can play this at 120 frames per second, which matches perfectly with that upper display. Now, the experience is not the best in the world just by virtue of these controls, and so I would not really play a lot of Destiny 2 on a clamshell like the Thor, but it is nice to be able to play that with high-resolution graphics and, 1080p, 120 frames per second. It's pretty awesome. But for me personally, I will probably be focusing on games that take advantage of this single analog stick experience because this to me is the most comfortable. In addition, local game streaming from a PC using Artemis and Apollo is really excellent. On average, I got 2.5 milliseconds of total decoding time, which is some of the best I've ever seen on an Android-based handheld. So yes, this is going to be an excellent local PC streaming device as well, provided that you're okay with the controls. Okay, and my final topic here before we wrap up is a bit of a bummer, but I just found that over the past couple weeks, I would not consider the AYN Thor to be a Nintendo DS and 3DS replacement wholesale. I've seen a couple reports from people who have been selling a 3DS in order to fund an AYN Thor, and I don't give a lot of personal recommendations on this channel. I usually just give you all the data and let you make up your own mind, but this is a direct recommendation in that I don't think you should be getting rid of your original hardware in favor of emulation, especially on the Thor, because I think it's just not there just yet. Now, in many ways, the Thor is a superior experience to some of these original consoles. It's going to look better, you're going to have upscaled resolutions, and just the overall experience is a lot more sleek, and you have this really great battery life too. But in general, I think that if you have the ability to hold on to your original console, then that is always going to be the wiser decision. One thing to bear in mind is that software emulation usually has inherent input delay compared to original hardware. Let's use the new Nintendo 2DS XL as an example. So this runs with 14 frames of delay with a 200 frames per second camera, which means that I'm getting about 58.33 milliseconds of overall input delay on the original hardware. And that sounds about right. That's about on average what you would get with a home console hooked up to a CRT, so it's going to feel very natural. Now, the Thor does a pretty good job in terms of input delay on an emulation handheld. I got 25 frames of overall delay, or about 104 milliseconds. I used every trick in the book to lower that input delay, including using 120 Hz up above, which is going to reduce that input lag. And I also turned off VSync in the Azahar app to reduce input delay even more. But even then, the input delay is nearly twice as much as the original hardware, and that is a best case scenario. So there are going to be some 3DS games that maybe just don't feel as natural as they did on the original hardware, and for some people that might be a deal breaker. Now for me, I'm not super susceptible when it comes to input lag, and so it actually plays perfectly fine, but I did want to show that nuance of difference there. Now in playing DS games, you're kind of getting hit from both sides. You have that inherent input delay, but then also many of these games were touchscreen based, and there's going to be delay in the touchscreen as well. On top of that, the screen technology is different, and so it just feels different with your stylus, and you can't use an original DS stylus on it either. For most DS games, I don't have any issues playing them, but when it comes to rhythm games, I definitely was having some problems. What I found is that I couldn't really sync up my moves to the music, which most of these rhythm games required. Instead, I had to use visual cues, and to me, that kind of broke the overall experience. So what this says to me is if you do plan on playing the Thor specifically with rhythm-style games, you probably are not going to have as great of a time as it would be on original hardware. Now, when it comes to games that are not rhythm-based, it's a bit better of an experience, but still not perfect. If we take a look at Phantom Hourglass right here, you can see that you use the fairy to direct link, and when using a stylus on original hardware like my DSi XL, it is basically in sync with my stylus. It's a little bit behind, but it almost feels like I'm controlling Link, and it's kind of a magical feeling. When doing the same setup, I can feel that there is a delay. You can see that the fairy is kind of dragging behind my cursor. It still works fine, but it doesn't have that little piece of magic like I was seeing on original hardware. So again, this is one of those reasons why if you have the ability to keep your original hardware, I would do that. I would think of the AYN Thor as a nice complement to the original experience. Another thing to consider with 3DS emulation is that it is a fairly stuttery experience, especially when you're compiling shaders when going into a new level or a new area, and so you will see like shaders popping in and then a little bit of a delay here and there. Now, the longer you play a game, the better it'll get, but it's still a little bit jarring when you enter into a new area, and it just kind of has a little bit of a delay to it. Again, the original experience usually doesn't have this. I think for most people who are used to emulation, they will probably find this perfectly fine, but if you are looking to replicate the 3DS experience, then I think this is going to be a little bit poorer of an experience. So again, it's all a trade-off in that this does look better and it's upscaled compared to the original hardware, but it doesn't quite feel the same. I recently did a video talking about different stylus options for DS and 3DS, and I found that basically none of them actually hit the mark. Now, I'm still kind of exploring other options here, but it is worth saying that, I don't think that this is a 3DS or DS replacement. And I think it would be irresponsible for me as a reviewer to say that this is a DS and 3DS replacement, because it is better in many ways, but it lacks a little bit of the magic in the original hardware. So yes, please hold on to that old stuff and think of this more as a really nice complement to it. Okay, I could talk about this thing all day, but I think we should start wrapping up. Let's talk about what I like and what I don't like about the AYN Thor. As always, we'll start with the good stuff, and number one, this thing is beautiful. I think the overall design is immaculate, and they did the best that they could with this particular form factor. Every time I open it up, I'm really impressed by its overall look. I think that they did an excellent job with this design. Not only does it have a compact size that makes me feel like it's holding an upgraded version of the 3DS, but it's also very powerful. I'm able to play just about anything I want on Android. It's awesome to not even have to think about just power in general, that I can just boot up a game, and in general, as long as it's compatible with the emulator, it's going to be an excellent experience. The software also makes it a pretty seamless experience when it comes to dual screen gameplay. I'll leave a link to all the emulators that I use down below in case you are getting set up, and I do plan on making a starter guide for dual screen handhelds at some point as well. But for the most part, I don't think you really need a special guide for the Thor, just because it's pretty similar to a single screen setup. You just have to jump into that Thor software to make some tweaks here and there. And having two screens really does expand your options. Beyond just having, 3DS and DS games running really well, you can also use it for multitasking. And if you plan on using it for that, then this is probably one of the best experiences out there. Now, of course, it's not perfect, and I wouldn't actually consider this to be an endgame handheld either. So let's talk about a couple of the things I didn't like. Number one is that the controls are a little bit cramped depending on the type of game that you're playing. And I think this is just a natural reaction to the fact that we have this form factor and a two-screen setup. It's not like the DS handhelds were ergonomic kings either, but this is a little bit more of the same when it comes to that. It's not so bad that I would consider it to be a deal breaker, but it is worth knowing going into it that there are more comfortable devices out there. They're just not going to have two screens. Also, by virtue of being a clamshell, there's not a lot of space for heat dissipation. Now, this is part and parcel with this form factor, but it is worth noting it does get a little bit warm. Not to the point of getting hot, and not to the point of getting uncomfortable for me, but it is worth noting. And then finally, this is a very shiny device because we have that all glass front. I think it's going to be the worst on the black model, and I think that the other models will be better, and I will test that. As soon as I get my rainbow version, I will probably make a dedicated video about that. In the end, I think that the pros of the AYN Thor far outweigh the cons, and so if you saw this whole video and you thought, yeah, this seems like a good product, it's going to be an excellent device for you. As long as it's within your budget and you're going to play the games that you want on it, this is an excellent fit. I think AYN did an excellent job here. They really nailed the feel of a 3DS, and I think that's what most people are excited about. And yes, this is an excellent handheld. There are no deal breakers here. There are a couple concessions that really have to do with the form factor, but otherwise it is an excellent handheld. For my part, over the past month or so, I've been torn between these two handhelds. I love the clamshell form factor and the two-screen appeal of the AYN Thor, but I love the overall comfort of the Conquer Pocket Fit. And so these two devices are high-end Android devices that kind of do like two different things at once. This one is, really focused on that 3DS and dual screen experience, whereas this one is just kind of a nice all-around handheld. And so between the two, if I had to take just one to a deserted island, it would probably be the Conquer Pocket Fit just because of the ergonomics, but I really don't think you can go wrong with either of these two high-end options. So the way I see it, if you are a Nintendo DS and 3DS fan and you want an upgraded experience with a two-screen setup, then the AYN Thor is definitely going to give you that. It has the same vibes as it, it's got all this power, dual OLED displays, and comes in at a pretty good price for what you're getting. I also think this clamshell form factor really helps when it comes to using it out and about. So if you are someone who has a more active lifestyle, you're going to plan on using this on travel or maybe, going back and forth between work, then this will be an excellent experience in that regard. But it is also worth noting that nostalgia will only get you so far, and just by virtue of having this form factor, the controls are a little bit cramped, and I found myself that over time, I've come to prefer this when it comes to just quick pick up and play gaming, where I can open it up, start playing a game. That's a really fun experience. But if I'm going to be sitting down for hours on end, then I want something that's a lot more comfortable, like this Conquer Pocket Fit or, the Odin 2 line of devices, something like that. That to me is a better fit for long-term gaming, whereas the AYN Thor is more of a pick up and play device. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and as always, thank you for watching this very long review. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found it helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.